face on the mural every day. Is there something you want to tell the kid? I'm actually going to work soon. Is there something you want to tell the kids that I can tell them about your grandfather today?
Yeah, that's awesome. It's a good question. I think I think a very common misconception with people like my grandfather or other great leaders, whether it's like a Nelson Mandela or a Dr. King, is that they kind of had this like special, like an innate ability. It's like they were almost born with something that made them special. But the more that I've learned about my grandfather's life is he was a very normal human being that didn't really grow up with many advantages, but he just had very big aspirations, and then he had a really persistent like work ethic. He was just so dedicated to his cause, and he really, he would never stop until he could see his work fulfilled. And even when he passed away, there was still so much more work to be done. But yeah, he was. I have a cousin that says that he's just he's an ordinary person that did extraordinary things. And I think many of our great humanitarian leaders are like that. And I think if we, as a society, can have more of that mentality, then it can hopefully inspire young people to set out to do big things like my grandfather or so many other like great leaders that the world has seen.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I'm open to really anything. You can ask about, anything about the filmmaking process or really about, my story or anything. I'm always an open book, so feel free. Don't be shy.
I just wanted to say thanks for sharing your story. It's very beautiful. As being a sixth generation Mexican American and feeling disconnected with my own culture, what's one thing as parents or mentors that we can do that you think that we can keep that connection with our culture?
Yeah, I mean, in essence, that's really what this film is about. I was someone that felt very disconnected, even though I came from this huge legacy and arguably one of the most iconic Chicano figures that this country has ever seen. And I, even as the grandson, just 2 generations down, my father being his eldest son, I felt very disconnected. And it was always very difficult growing up feeling that way. But it also wasn't until I became older and really started asking those questions that I kind of reached kind of like a comfort level, and there wasn't any shame. It was really, I just saw it as like a huge opportunity. And I think no matter where you come from, what your nationality or ethnicity is, we all, as human beings, have an incredibly rich history, no matter who you are. And I think the most important thing as young people or any generation is to reach out to the generation prior and try and connect those bridges. And I think that my job to tell this story of my grandfather was to do it. I wasn't lucky enough to really have a good relationship with my grandfather because he passed away when I was so young. But I had a giant resource in my own father, and I kind of used that generation of my own father as a bridge to get to my grandfather. And that's kind of like those generational, those gaps can be bridged simply with conversation. And once you start learning more about, where you come from, then you get that pride. And when you have that pride is kind of, in my opinion, when special things can happen, because you really know a lot about your own history, and most importantly, you know a lot about the sacrifices of, whoever your people are and where they come from. So really, it's just kind of open dialogue. And when I was younger, it was very difficult, and I think it was just a matter of time. I always tell young people, whether it's like I'm speaking to high school students or even middle school or elementary students, that if there ever is a feeling of being uncomfortable or not feeling connected to your heritage, that it's okay and that it just takes time. And when things happen naturally, that's kind of when eventually with conversation, you can bridge those gaps and feel very comfortable.
Sorry. So I know you mentioned, how, again, some of us were not as connected to our past, and I know you've done different things with universities and schools. As a campus, I would like to ask you, what are some things that we can do to help our students, connect, learn more of their past, and obviously be proud of it? But any advice that you can give us as a campus that you have seen that, I don't know?
Yeah, I think especially, so I can speak on only my own experience, but being a Cuban American and also a Mexican American, and this film kind of dives into my Mexican American side, I think it's very common, and especially so many students, college-age students that I talk to at university, it's very common that they don't know a lot about their parents' or even their grandparents' experience, and a lot of it is rooted in the same issues that my family had, and that was my father had a lot of he had a lot of like trauma from growing up very difficult circumstances, and when he had children, he wanted to kind of shield his own kids from that. So it can be very difficult when the communication stops. And there's so many things that happen in this film that I learned about my dad that kind of just opened up this whole new world for me, because he's my connection to this history. So it's a little bit redundant from the last question, but I think, especially in the United States, I think we sometimes tend to have not a lack of respect, but a little bit of a lack of understanding of how important our past generations are, and especially like the elderly, especially for young people with their grandparents, because they've lived through so many difficult things and have seen so much of history and have seen so much of the world change, that's kind of our gold as young people. It can use it as a lot of kind of as a compass. And so that's kind of what I did in this film, used kind of my father's history as kind of my own guide, to go backwards from there, gain this comfort and this pride of where I come from, and then that kind of just, it's a very abstract feeling, but I feel just a lot more grounded as a human being, knowing where I come from and this history that's so important to my family.
Thank you so much. And I just wanted to add that I didn't know a lot of my dad's past too. Sorry.
It's okay. It's okay.
So it's definitely a learning experience for me too. And I'm the youngest in my family, so he never shared, sorry, a lot of the struggles that he faced. So now me thinking, oh my God, like I never had to, cross the border through the cerros and like risk my life.
Yeah, it's definitely something that gives you this great appreciation, this great perspective, and it's a very, as Latinos in this country, we have a very beautiful history. It's a very beautiful culture, and I think it's something to be very proud of. And in my scenario, I never wanted to ask my dad a lot of these questions when I was younger, because I had a slight understanding that it was a very difficult childhood for him and that he would not want to open up about it. And so just being like somewhat of a perceptive kid, I thought, why would I open up these wounds on my father that I love so much? But it wasn't until I got a lot of push from my own mother telling me that he is very open to do it, but he's just the same way you're scared to ask, he's scared to share. And as human beings, we always have fears, even with our own siblings, whether it's brother, sister, mother, father, son, daughter. And the second that we started having those conversations, like that guard completely dropped. And it sounds kind of silly that you could have a guard with your own father or your own mother, but in our culture, especially as Latinos in this country, it's very common. But that bridge can be dropped so easily, and that's kind of what we did in this film, and it's very similar to your story and the story of so many Latinos in this country. So yeah, my advice to people that have that upbringing where they don't know so much about their parents' history or their grandparents is really just to kind of have that communication and kind of just see where it goes. And I was pleasantly surprised because my dad is he's a very quiet person, and I thought we're gonna put cameras in front of him and he's probably gonna become even smaller and not want to share, but it really kind of was the opposite. And it wasn't until after we made the film that he said that he was just very happy that I had an interest in this history. So we kind of met together in the middle, and it was definitely like a very beautiful experience.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your story, because it's important for us to know our past, to value where we're at and what sacrifices people had to make for us to be here. And to your point, it was probably the fact that now I have a 3-year-old that really sparked my interest in, okay, I want him to know these things, Thank you.
Any other questions? If not, then no? Okay, yeah, if not, then thank you everybody so much for coming. I really appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed this film. Like I said earlier, it's always a humbling experience. When you work on a film like this, you're kind of in a bubble. We filmed a lot of these scenes, and you're editing it for so many days and months on end. Nobody's seeing it, and you're moving at like a snail's pace, and it's very difficult to see kind of a final product. And then once it's finished, you're so relieved that you were able to actually put together a coherent piece. But then you have this huge other weight that's kind of dropped on you that is now, what are audiences going to think about it, or will people even be interested in it? So whenever we have audiences to share the film with, I'm always very happy and kind of just humbled. So thank you again for showing up.